Good evening, folks. Welcome to the closing night event of the Cinematters Film Festival, Cinematters New York Social Justice Film Festival. My name is Isaac Zablocki. I'm Director of Film Programs at the Zabar Center for Film at the Marlene Meyerson JCC Manhattan. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Thank you for joining all weekend long. I was just thinking about it, how normally on MLK Day, we have traditionally screened a little part of the I Have a Dream speech of MLK. And I feel that screening this trailer brings that message to life in as good of, well, maybe not as good of a way, but in a great way that we're really proud to honor MLK's legacy with the films and the conversations we've been showing here all weekend long. We enter truly a new era. So let us not for a moment think that our responsibilities towards social justice are over. We need to continue creating change and bring other people on. So you have most of the movies are available till midnight tonight. Tell your friends, bring people on. Create change by having people watch a movie and a conversation. I want to give a huge thank you to all the filmmakers who were with us and who made these amazing films and are creating change through really amazing work. And our films, I mean, rewatching these films this week, it's just, we have such a diverse group, and I really want to thank everybody who was involved with all these films and all these conversations. I really want to highlight these conversations. I don't know how many of you have participated in other conversations this week, and no pressure on this panel, but the conversations have been amazing, and go back and revisit them on our YouTube channel. And really, we hear all the diverse voices. We just had a conversation that included Dr. Yusuf Salam, who is one of the exonerated 5. I mean, to have him here on MLK Day is just amazing. Or check out Casey Camp Hornick, who's a native activist from the Condor and the Eagle. It was really just so diverse and so fulfilling. I really, again, think there's no better way to honor the legacy of Dr. King. So I am honored and humbled to be a part of all this. And I want to give thanks really to the people who are amazing teammates and make this all happen. The amazing team here at the Marlene Meyerson JCC Manhattan. First of all, the amazing partnership from the Joseph Stern Center for Social Responsibility, led by Cheryl Parker. Cheryl, thank you so much. Of course, the Associate Director of Cinematters, who really leads this project, Karima B. Parton. You'll be hearing from both of them in a moment. A huge thank you to our team member, Mark Labradorf, who's a development officer, but is here with us every step of the way on every level and has been amazing in his leadership. Austin Riegers, who's the program manager for the Stern Center for Social Responsibility. Morgan Magid, who is our program manager in the film department. Jessica Epstein, who ran the marketing for all of this. Sam from AV, who has been to absolutely every event this weekend, has been running things from behind the scenes. Our interns, everyone at the JCC who has been supportive, our board, and and of course, all of you, our community, for being there. Turn on your cameras, be a part of this. Join us tonight. We want to hear your voice. Thank you for all your questions and for being so active during this weekend. I want to give a huge thank you to our generous supporters, Meg and Bennett Goodman. And of course, to our amazing advisory committee. A lot of you have been here all week too, so thank you all. They helped select these films and helped build this whole program. I want to give a big thank you to all of our partners and really highlight the New Republic, who have been so active with us. Please check out all of the New Republic's work. Finally, I thank, of course, as I mentioned, all of you for being a part. So be a part of this conversation. If you have questions, put them in the chat and we will open your mics and hopefully get to you. And now I'll hand things over to the amazing Karima B. Parton. Karima.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your leadership and everything that you have allowed to happen with the Cinematters New York Social Justice Film Festival. We also, it goes without saying, doing all this work does not mean anything if we can't pass on the knowledge to the ones that are coming after us. So huge thank you to our interns who were brought to us through the Real Works organization, Elijah Mincer and Elizabeth Luna. Thank you so much for your hard work. And Sam over in AV, the AV team at the JCC, thank you so much as well. I'm so delighted and happy to talk about John Lewis' Good Trouble. What an amazing film directed by Dawn Porter. It chronicles the life and career of the legendary civil rights activist and Democratic representative from Georgia. The film explores Lewis's 60 plus years of social activism and legislative action on civil rights, voting rights, gun control, healthcare reform, and immigration. With that being said, I would love to pass it on to Cheryl Parker, who are going to tell us about our speakers for this evening. Cheryl.
Hi, everyone. I'm Cheryl Parker, director of the JCC's Joseph Stern Center for Social Responsibility, which educates, inspires, and empowers people to work toward a better and fairer world. We do this by offering opportunities for learning and action year-round. So if you enjoyed the content of this festival, one way to keep learning and keep engaging with the themes of the festival is to join us for our programming. I want to thank the rest of the team on Cinematters, who have been such incredible partners in making this festival happen. Two more things before we get started. During these tough times, we're relying on support from our community more than ever before to keep our virtual programming strong and keep us connected to each other. Please consider making a donation to the JCC so that we can remain a thriving hub for resources, connections, and community for years to come. To donate, please text the word community to 56512. You will be hearing from an incredible panel this evening, and we also want to hear from all of you. So if you have questions for the panelists during the session, please put them in the chat box, and if your question is selected, someone from the festival team will contact you, and then we will unmute your mic so that you can ask your question live. And really, the conversation is so much more interesting when the audience gets involved. So please ask any questions. And now, I want to welcome our incredible panel. Producer, Ben Arnon, co-founder of Color Farm Media. Wanda Mosley, Senior State Coordinator of Georgia's Black Voters Matter, and Myrna Perez, Director of Voting Rights and Elections at the Brennan Center for Justice, and our moderator, Brittany Luse, co-host of the Nod podcast. Welcome to you all.
Hi, so we can just jump right into it. I personally enjoyed the film. I loved it. It was a lot packed into 90 minutes, and hopefully we can get through some of that with the four of us today together. So just to start off, Ben, you actually one of the producers of the film. How did your company, Color Farm, get involved with this film, and what attracted you to the project?
Great question. Thanks, Brittany. I love the nod, by the way.
Thank you.
And hi, everyone. Thank you for having this panel today. So my company is called Color Farm Media, and my co-founder's name is Erica Alexander. And Erica and I met in 2008 at the DNC convention. I was a delegate for Obama. She was a delegate for Hillary. Over the years, we talked a lot about community organizing, the importance of that, and how it all kind of, the root of that is storytelling. And so she was not only a delegate for Hillary, but she was also a surrogate. And so as a result, over the years from 2008 to 2016, she campaigned with a lot of elected officials. And so she had actually campaigned in 2015 on behalf of the Hillary Clinton campaign with John Lewis, Stacey Abrams, and Ayanna Pressley, all the four of them. And it was an incredible experience that she talks about glowingly. And so as a result of that, someone in John Lewis's Georgia office and his Atlanta office, one of his senior directors in that office, was aware that we had launched a production company and contacted us that they had a documentary film that was in the works, and they wanted to see if we could help out with it. And so the first thing that we did was we decided that we needed to bring on a great director, and our first choice was Dawn Porter. And we called Dawn, and Dawn actually got on the phone with us and said, "Hey, I want to let you know that I have not looked at the deck that you sent over, because I actually have my own John Lewis film that I'm working on as well. And so for about 5 seconds, we were a little bit concerned. And then we, in the spirit of John Lewis and the beloved community, we actually really quickly all said, almost at the same exact time, maybe it makes sense for us to merge our projects and come together and do this together. And that's what we did. And we were on our way. And we were really fortunate to be able to do this in partnership with Dawn and also her producing partner, Laura Michael Chisholm as well.
Myrna and Wanda, talk to me about what this film meant to you as people who are really engaged daily in the fight against voter suppression. Either one of you can start.
I guess I'll go. We're in the middle of a fight that John Lewis and others started, but can't end with them. We have seen the greatest pushback of overt and naked voter suppression that this country hasn't seen in the likes in like 50 years. And one of the ways in which I think we can honor him is by passing the piece of legislation that has now been renamed for him. And that is the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. John Lewis, Martin Luther King, and others really understood the idea that if we weren't able to give African-American voters a chance to convert their numbers into political power, we weren't going to see any changes. And we were going to continue to see the suppression and oppression and the dehumanization and the disrespect that was all too pervasive. And the Voting Rights Act did so much in basically accelerating this country into a place that was more just. We still had a lot of work to do, and we still do. But the Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act in 2013 in a case called Shelby County versus Holder. And we have been playing like catch up ever since then. Our noses are barely above water. We're constantly struggling to try and regain ground that at one point we had won, and now we're losing. And the Voting Rights Advancement Act passed the House last year. It obviously didn't go anywhere with the Senate. And when we lost Mr. Lewis, they decided to honor him by renaming it. So I think especially on this day, on a day that we not only honor Dr. King, we need to remember the legacy he gave us in terms of the Voting Rights Act. And I think the best way that we could honor John Lewis is not by naming buildings after him or, putting up tweets about him. Those are all things that are really important. But if we really want to give him an enduring legacy, let's give him back the Voting Rights Act that meant so much to him, because that is the way in which he is empowering the communities that he cared so much about to shape and impact their own destiny.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Obviously, living in Georgia, the state where he chose to be his home, being a native Alabaman, it's not even a sense of obligation. It's just, it's like breathing. Like we have to keep doing that fight, keep that fight going. It's not an option. It's just a thing. And so many of us are involved in it. I couldn't agree with Myrna more. That legislation in particular is extremely important. Look, I'm in a state that just made history, and we want to continue to make history. We have to, be ready, because very first day of our state legislative session, they came for our voting rights, and it has been the topic of discussion since then. It was also important, again, that particular piece of legislation was the centerpiece of our strategy for the runoff election here in Georgia. We know that in order to increase turnout, to engage Black voters, we couldn't go with that national narrative of Georgia, please come and save us, because that doesn't resonate with Black people. It just doesn't. Because no one came and saved us when COVID ravaged Southwest Georgia. No one came and saved us when over 200 polling precincts were closed after that 2013 gutting of the Voting Rights Act. No one came and saved us when our gubernatorial election was stolen. So that doesn't work. But when we explain to our folks why it is that we have to save ourselves and what's at stake for us, then that's what resonates. So that John Lewis Voting Rights Act, along with the George Floyd I Can't Breathe Act, and then looking at some things particularly specifically in that HEROES Act that talk about childcare assistance and economic relief. We knowing that Black-owned businesses have suffered disproportionately during the pandemic. So, that fight is intertwined in everything we do. His legacy looms large, and we are proud to continue to do the work in his name and in his honor.
So, bearing down on that a little bit more specifically, I think that anybody who's seen the film and anybody who's in this room likely understands the value of voting. Certainly, all of you understand the value of voting. But beyond that, as like a nonviolent tool, what other ways and what other strategies are available for the average citizen to get involved in this fight to expand and restore voting rights in America?
Well, I think you're selling a little bit short the kind of push we're going to have in order to make this Congress actually do something.
Mm-hmm.
We have been trying for 7 years to get them to restore the Voting Rights Act, so it's not going to miraculously happen. I mean, yes, I think there's more than what the audience can do, but I can tell you lots and lots of people have been putting a lot of pressure on Congress, and power does not like to give up what they have, and there are many, many people, many politicians around the country who are viewing as their job security plan keeping down and keeping out voters of color. So we need to be in a position where we are making Congress pass this, because they are not going to just do it. They could have just done it and they haven't. So obviously, I think we can't sell that short. That is something that everybody who's listening here needs to really put their shoulder in. But the other thing that I think is really important is that John Lewis believed in people. He believed in the redeeming power of people, and he, one by one, in addition to his fabulous pieces, was making the case every day for a robust and participatory democracy. And I think one of the reasons we are having so much trouble in this country is because we have taken for granted that that's where everybody is. And it's not. There are a lot of people in this country that have anxiety over the browning of America, and are going to work really, really hard to make sure that they keep what they think that they deserve or what they think that they have. And as such, we need to be constantly making the case that our democracy is better when it includes all of us, and that your democracy is cheapened when you allow someone to exclude your neighbor, even if that neighbor looks different from you, and even if that neighbor has a different political viewpoint than you do. Like, democracy is not a spectator sport. Like, not only do we need to be pressuring the people who are our elected leaders that supposedly work for us to do what we want them to do, we also need to be making the case to everybody we interact with that we want a robust and inclusive democracy, because it is not going to happen unless we do that.
Yeah, and to just build on what Myrna just said, voting is really just the first step. It's the tip of the iceberg. It's the tip off of a basketball game that's going to last 4 quarters and might go into overtime. We have to stay involved. We have to stay vigilant. We have to interact with elected officials. And then we got to bring everybody with us, our cousins, our coworkers, our neighbors, people we go to church or temple with, the mailman, everybody, the UPS driver, everybody. We have to keep everybody involved, because to that point, when we build this democracy, it has to include everybody. It has to include all of our voices. And if we don't, then it is weakened and it's not going to work. So voting is our superpower. It's how we build power. It's interesting that we're coming off these huge federal races, this presidential year, and now everyone will take a big exhale, and it's local elections. People like to call it an off year. There's no such thing as an off year. In fact, I would argue that these local elections, for most of us, are even more important in a lot of ways than the presidential or the Senate. Maybe Georgia is the exception, but on normal years, we could make the argument that it's even more important. But especially when we think about all the things that have transpired over the last year, it was our local local mayors, not in Georgia, who really pushed forward ordinances and took the steps necessary to keep us safe during the pandemic. We couldn't rely on leadership at the top. It was mayors who did that. When we think about, going into the summer and all the unrest that we had and all the reckoning that we're having with racial justice in this country, people who say they want to defund the police, well, that's our local elected officials. That's our mayor, our city council. They're going to be looking at budgets this year. And so if defund the police was your cry, if that's what made you risk your life to go to the streets, you can't just sit home now. You got to get out there and get involved. You got to be virtually on these meetings when they're talking about budgets. That's how we're going to create change. Voting is not going to get it done alone. We have to be at the table. Every one of these meetings, we got to have a seat. We got to have a say.
Brittany, one thing I would add to that is that we also need to hold accountable and put pressure on not just elected officials, but also the places that we all work at, these companies, because this past year, we started to see that companies started to give their employees, more flexibility to, on election day and to get involved and to be involved. But and they started to talk a lot about, things that they need to do to improve in terms of racial equity and inclusion. But that can't just be a fleeting, thing that happened in 2020 because of all the racial unrest, because of COVID. So we need to also hold them accountable to continue to make it easier for citizens to get out and vote and to get involved on election day and on the lead up to election day. And that it's okay for people to maybe have conversations at work about voting, because in the past, it was actually taboo at a lot of places. That needs to be embraced and encouraged a lot more moving forward.
To piggyback on something that Myrna was mentioning about how this fight for restoring the Voting Rights Act of literally 1965 that was unraveled basically in 2013. People have been fighting for that for 7 years. And that is actually one of the major themes and one of the major scenes, I think, in storylines that is returned to over and over again throughout the documentary is, seeing John Lewis, Congressman Lewis, this person whose work was so foundational to the establishment of the Voting Rights Act, watch it more or less completely unravel during his lifetime and have to pick up that same fight again as a septuagenarian. So, Ben, talk to me about what it was like working on this film as Congressman Lewis was fighting to restore this law that he fought for, 40, 50 years ago.
Yeah, it's a really great point. And he set such a great example because, Dawn actually speaks about this a lot. There are interviews where she's spoken about the fact that, there were things that were happening. We actually were not filming anymore in 2020, but we filmed all through 2019 and the back half of 2018. And there were, all kinds of things that we, the producing team and members of the crew and everything, were down about. And the most hopeful person was always John Lewis. Congressman Lewis, always was the person that really sort of had, despite being at it for 60 years or more, he was the person that really kept on seeing a better day in the future. And so that I think is something that we all have to remember. This is also not a sprint. It's a marathon full of sprints. And there are a lot of people who get involved with causes and who get involved with something that they're passionate about for a few months, maybe for a few years, maybe for a decade. Very few people actually do it for the majority of their life, for 60 plus years. And I think that's something that really inspired all of us, and probably most of you here who have watched the film and learned about Congressman Lewis's life is his ability to to continue to push forward, even though he ran into setbacks and then new sets of new obstacles and new rounds of setbacks. So
one of the parts of the film that brought me to tears, of many parts of the film that brought me to tears, was when Congressman Lewis was approached, I believe in a parking lot, by a woman who said that she was born in 1949, and she also spent her childhood sharecropping. She picked cotton as a child, and she was younger than Congressman Lewis. Like, this woman was my parents' generation. I don't want to embarrass any members of my family who may be watching, but I may have or may not have some aunts and uncles who are maybe slightly older than this woman. And this is something that I had read about and read about and done reporting on in the past, but really seeing somebody grab his arm like that and express that she had had that same upbringing, that she had lived that same childhood, but she was even younger than he was. It just reminded me again that the events described in the film just were not that long ago. And that moment came to mind later again in the film, when Stacey Abrams said this about Congressman Lewis. She said, "You cannot replace a John Lewis because it is a matter of strategy. Someone who has cultivated a story to remind us that our past is not past." So I pose this question to each of you. Talk to me about why placing Congressman Lewis's story accurately in time is so important as a matter of political strategy. And, I think about today's MLK Day, and John Lewis and MLK are thought of as two of the big six, the six people who were integral to the planning of the March on Washington in 1963. And John Lewis, I believe, was the last to die of that group. So, we're losing kind of some of these leaders who were around at that time fighting that fight, who are still alive today. What do we lose as that generation continues to pass on? Wanda, if you'd like to start. I saw you snapping, so I was like, okay, is this resonating?
Yeah, I know. I was still thinking though, because that's a heavy question, and somebody who's out here in the streets, I'm really grappling with that. I mean, one of the things that I whenever, because we've done a few of these, shout out to the folks at Participant for setting up a lot of opportunities to just talk about this amazing work that Ben and his team put together. One of the things that I really hope, especially with the young people, that when they watch this documentary or if they have conversations about it, is that they get inspired, right? And that they understand, look, organizing today is nothing like organizing back then. I tell them all the time, y'all, they didn't have social media. They didn't even have cell phones, okay? They had the old school phone tree when they needed to put together an event. So as much as, we want to cry and whine about this and that, we have it so much easier. And so the legacy that he leaves us is, like Ben said, there just aren't a lot of people who are dedicating their life to something the way that he did. I mean, I've only been doing this work since probably about 2015-ish myself. So I'm only 5-6 years into organizing and being into electoral spaces. So, the legacy that he's left us, the way that he's shown, I don't know if there are going to be many more John Lewises, to be honest with you, which is a little bit sad. But it's tough. It's difficult. It's not easy work. It's quite extractive, if I'm being honest. Folks are wanting stuff, and you're doing so much stuff for a lot of people. And so it's a labor of love, but it's tough. So I don't know. I don't know. I'm struggling with that one. I'm gonna reserve my time and come back at the end for like 60 seconds, okay?
Myrna, Ben.
I have a comment unless Myrna wanted to go first. Okay, so I think one thing that's really significant about John Lewis's career in history as an activist and as an organizer, and is that there are sort of two chunks of time. There's before he was a congressman, and then there's after he was a congressman. That's about 33 years that he was a congressman or more. And so, but I think what's so significant is that he ended up on the inside. He was definitely part of the establishment, if people want to call it that. He was there for 33 years, but he always kept that outsider mentality. He always kept that community organizer mentality. It is important that people recognize that they can go run for elected office. They can move into positions of power where you can get things done that you just cannot get done from being outside of that structure. But you can also do that with keeping yourself grounded with that outsider perspective. And so I think that's really important, because sometimes I think on both sides of the aisle, sometimes we hear people talk a bit about the establishment and the outside, and I think that they can live that they can live together even within the same person, like John Lewis was able to show.
I think the simple answer is there's no replacing John Lewis as a person, as a leader, as a moral force. I think when we lost him, Congress lost the moral center of what they could hope to be, because no one there had made the kind of sacrifices day in and day out, including like his own physical safety, that he had made. But one of the things that I think was really gifted about Mr. Lewis is that I think he knew he was fighting the long fight. Like, I think he didn't expect it to be like done because we passed the Voting Rights Act or because he got elected to Congress. I think he understood that having been there when the Voting Rights Act was negotiated and passed, that so much of our country's system were built to exclude people. And that we weren't going to suddenly make that go away because we decided we were going to stop excluding people, right? That we're going to need to do affirmative work to actually root out the systemic injustices that are baked into our systems. And he knew that simply the absence of racism or the absence of overt discrimination wasn't going to put us in a place where everybody could be truly and fairly equal. And so he was still putting his shoulder into it, and he was still working hard. That man was on the floor, right? Like he was like, he would go to meetings, he would go to hearings, he was making speeches all the time. And one of the things, and I know that this is a diverse audience, I'm sorry, but I think something that is really important to who he was his faith. And I think, his faith tradition was one in which he knew how his faith story began and how it ends. And in the end, love wins. And in that middle part, his God was using all of us to write it. And so I think he understood the very Christian idea of God's work our hands. And he did it all the time. And that made him be generous, and that made him be forgiving, and that made him believe that people could be redeemed, and that made him just be able to keep the faith and keep the hope about this world could be better, and that we had an obligation to do our best, because he had a fire and a calling and a command from something that transcended mere mortal failings and mere mortal avarices.
Thinking about Congressman Lewis's legacy, not just on a day like today, MLK Day, but also during this time, has been really interesting. I viewed the film for the first time last week, and obviously after everything that happened on January 6th, and even just speaking to each of you today, like Wanda specifically, like because of the work of so many people like you, we saw like an expansion in education, protections, turnout for voters in the state of Georgia, especially among groups whose rights have typically been disenfranchised. I'm thinking of Black voters and other voters of color specifically. And all of this work was crucial to the election of Joe Biden to the presidency, and also to the election of Raphael Warnock and John Ossoff to the US Senate. But obviously we all know what happened on the 6th, the day that basically, the Senate runoff election was really called, and we were supposed to have another count for the electoral votes so that the presidential election could be called again for the 6,000th time since November 7th. And, the past 2 weeks have been filled with so much tension in this country, where I felt like, our 2020, can we get any more tension? And this January has definitely proved that there absolutely can be more. I think that everybody is kind of existing in a little bit of a heightened state, especially this week being, we're just 2 days shy of inauguration. How does the message of this film endure during this moment of backlash?
I'll kick it off. I think that's a great question. I think that, it goes back to that, to the fact that this is a marathon, and John Lewis, showed that. And I think that, that helps us to kind of maybe see past, some more very difficult days that are ahead of us, and see to a future that might be brighter. And so they'll give ourselves, the hope and wisdom and courage to continue to press on. One of the things that you saw in the film as well with John Lewis was that as he got older and wiser, he started to connect more with that younger generation, so that he didn't lose touch with that. So like he wrote the graphic novel March, and then there was the footage that you saw from Comic-Con. Mm-hmm. Over the last couple of years, he made sure to connect deeply with a lot of the students that were forming new organizing movements and making a lot of change. And so I think that that's something that also I think can be taken from the film is that multi-generational approach that John Lewis certainly embraced, and how that can help to to create a dynamic atmosphere where we're all encouraged to keep pressing forward, because because there are days that it'll be it'll be dark, and you need to have that hope that you can see a bright future ahead.
Wanda, did you want to go, or do you want me to jump in?
Yeah, I mean, what we witnessed at the Capitol, this backlash that you call it, Brittany. I mean, it's ongoing, really. It's not really anything new. It just that it was a different target. Cameras were rolling. It's a sacred place. It's a symbol of democracy for this country, and it's the beacon that people around the world look to. All of those things. But I honestly, being people of color in this country, being Black in this country, it wasn't that surprising. It was horrible to watch. It was awful. But we know why it happens. We know why it exists. We know why people hold on to those feelings. And a lot of it, so first and foremost, obviously it's rooted in racism, but it's also rooted in just fear of the unknown. People who have this guilt that in some ways is ingrained generationally. They are fearful that, once they lose power, because they are losing power, because this country is transitioning. We are shifting to become a majority minority country. Georgia will be there before the next census. And so folks are fearing, the oppressor fears that the people that they have oppressed are going to turn around and do the same thing to them once we get into power. But we're not looking at it that way. We're not seeking power to revenge anything. We're seeking power for justice. I mean, honestly, for Black people, we're seeking power just to live. Like, honestly, real talk, if I'm just real for a minute, one of my prayers is that one day we get to a place in this country where a Black person can make it home safely with a broken tail light. There's not a lot to ask. There's not a lot to ask. So we're in this time and place in this country where it truly is a fight and a battle. But Ben made a point earlier about just having conversations, just talking to folks. If we can take down some of these barriers and just have conversations, oftentimes we'll find it's not a lot of difference between us. People with kids want their kids to have, a safe environment to grow up in. People want, a piece of that American dream. We want to be able to own a home and start a business, but I want to be able to have the same great interest rate that everybody else has. I don't want to be straddled with student loans, and but we have to look back and acknowledge generational wealth and opportunities that didn't exist for people who look like me. So it's a struggle. It's a lot, but the events that we witness, they just sort of encapsulate where we are right now in this country, and they sometimes remind us that we haven't gone that far. But we're still fighting. We still believe in that same hope too. So we trying to get free too. So we're gonna keep fighting. We're not gonna just mail it in and give up. We still out here in the forefronts, fighting the good fight too. And obviously, looking at and leaning on the legacy of a John Lewis, who literally his entire life, from I think it was the age of 15, Ben, when he first heard MLK speak and said, "This is what I'm gonna do." There we have it. We have no better example than to look to him.
Myrna?
I want to just kind of react to both of those. I mean, it's not surprising to me that he made an effort to reach out to the young movement leaders, because he was the young movement leader that was causing all sorts of trouble for other folks because he wasn't standing in line, falling in line when he had more experienced movement leaders telling him how he should be. And I think it doesn't surprise me at all that he recognized, look, I know what it was like to be a young movement leader. I know what it was like to have to both respect my elders and acknowledge that some of them have more experience, but also that my experiences and the experiences of the people that I represent mean something. And I also think that the importance of the movie now is to remind folks that we need to be careful that we don't go back there, and that we are a lot closer than I think people might want to believe, right? I mean, I think we are a lot closer than I think people might want to believe. And I think it's really, really important that when people are thinking about what they did and who they were and what sort of challenges that we faced, we're not in a business of so imagining that it's too distant, because we have our own different version of a fight for justice and equality on our hands. Looks a lot different, but there are a lot of elements that are there. And I think people should be horrified and people should be scared at the connections that they see. And they need to say real quick that this is not the country that I want. This is not the country that I'm going to allow to come into being. And that those folks who would try to keep our democracy for themselves are not going to prevail. We're not going to let them do it. I am going to be part of the American public that stands up for my brother, that stands up for my sister, that stands up for myself and for my family, and that stands up for a country to make sure that we are not taken hostage by a minority of very loud, very armed, very scary people who don't want to see all of us participating.
I'm glad that that y'all brought up the youth, because this is one of my last questions. One of the major themes of Good Trouble was the power and the strategy of youth organizers. You know, for much of the film, you see Congressman Lewis as the elder statesman, but there are so many clips of him in his younger years and seeing other people react to the action that he and his peers were making back in the 60s. You know, and you just see how unpopular, and we're reminded of how unpopular his views were back in the day. And it kind of reminded me of, you know, some of the intergenerational conversation or lack of intergenerational conversation that I've been seeing casually between, you know, families or, you know, close friend group, you know, but also in the workplace, also on social media, also, you know, in, you know, in Congress. You know, you're seeing so many older people, sometimes even older Black people, taking umbrage with, you know, the Black Lives Matter protests or calls to defund the police, or other civil rights fights of people, you know, of my generation, millennials, or, you know, the generation below us, those of Gen Z. What do you hope audiences take from this film as far as how we regard, you know, youth organizers or young people who are fighting for change? And how do we think about that group of people? How do we think about young people as we consider, you know, the future of the fight of voter suppression? It almost sounds grim for me to say the future of it, but I mean, just considering the way things have gone for the past 300 years, I think it would be naive of me to consider it like, you know, rounding out in the next 2 or 3 months. So yeah, how are we thinking about, like, what do you want people to take away from this film as far as like how they regard the young people in their lives, or the young people in their lives who are fired up about change, but maybe in a way that they're not used to, or in a way that they don't necessarily agree with?
Yeah, I hope that, you know, I hope that people will remember that at one point in time, John Lewis was the troublemaker. He was the radical one. He was the young one that the elders kept saying, stand down, don't do this. Oh, we can't have, you know, John over here. He's all radical with this, that, and the third. And look who he grew up to be. It's okay. It's going to be all right. So we can't exclude the young people. We have to welcome them in. We have to open our ears and listen and hear what they're saying. You know, this is such a critical time, especially with that generation. I mean, we got to have them in. And we have to also understand that, you know, they're organizing in a different, far different generation than even when I, you know, started organizing less than 10 years ago. Things are different. It's the social media. It's all these other aspects that if, you know, we don't get on board with, we're going to be left behind. So we're needing them to keep pushing things forward. We're needing to hear their issues so that they can talk to their peers. And we can't afford to lose a generation. We can't afford to lose any votes. We have to welcome them in. And so if nothing else, you know, this film and knowing John Lewis's history should tell us, you know, we can't write anybody off. Everybody has a role to play. Everybody has an opinion to be shared that should be valued, and that, you know, it is incumbent upon all of us to welcome everybody in. Now, when they leave, you can sit around and talk about, oh, them crazy young people, this, that, and the third. That's fine, but we have to welcome them in. We can't leave people out, because it's going to take every vote. It's going to take, you know, look, I don't think I can do this as long as Congressman Lewis did. I'm not running up those Capitol stairs at his age the way he did in the documentary. I don't think I'm going to be able to do that. So we got to keep bringing more people in. We absolutely have to. We really, really do.
Ben?
Yeah, I would add to that I mean, we see this time and time again in history. Young people know what the future holds. They are they're the innovators. They're the people who will make the future. They need to be cognizant that the older generations have incredible wisdom that they can and should tap into, but there needs to be full respect and tolerance on both sides so that the older generations embrace and make room for the younger generation. Actually, I think that's an important thing too, is that I think it's I think it's important for some elected officials who have been in office a long time to start to groom successors, to start to work with young people and mentor them, so that they could start to make space and make room for some of the young people to get increasingly involved as well. And also a shout out to I think it was to Nicole's 15-year-old daughter, who I just saw in the chat is out there causing good trouble and inspired to run for Congress in the future. So that sounds great.
There is a really good point what you make about Ben, about like grooming successors. That was one of the most profound parts of the documentary, was just seeing how you had all of these different people who are elected officials: Ayanna Pressley, AOC, Stacey Abrams, Rashid Tlaib, Cory Booker, Ilhan Omar, Antonio Delgado. I could go on, who each of them, some of them were very different. Some of them are very different from each other and disagree fundamentally on a lot of things, but they all credit Congressman Lewis. They credit him with the existence of their careers. And so I agree, definitely, that's a really, really important thing to think about. Myrna.
I was just going to say, I think, especially when we're talking about elections and when we're talking about things like redistricting, like, it is to our own disadvantage and peril to not remember that the young people today are the voters of tomorrow, or the young people today or the Congress leaders of tomorrow. And especially as our country is shorting students by minimizing civics education, by not getting our act together with how we're going to provide high quality education during time of COVID, we are going to be in a place where all of the students who have not already understood the importance of free and fair and accessible elections, and have not understood the importance of a fair and equal country, are going to be susceptible to the lies and misinformation, because nature abhors a vacuum. So I think when you see a young person that seems to be unmoored because they don't have a social circle anymore because of COVID, or because they don't have civics education who are teaching them the very basics about the way our institution works, we need to think about, like, who is going to be filling that vacuum. And it needs to be people like John Lewis. It needs to be people like us. It needs to be people who are making the case that our world is better when all of us are participatory and all of us are inclusive. Because one of the big problems with change is that it doesn't stop, and we could revert if we're not careful, if we're not vigilant, and if we're not bringing the people behind us with us, right, or after us with us. So it's not just a matter of strategy. In my mind, it is a matter of preservation, right? Like, if we care about our gains, we need to make sure that we have sold them, and the people behind us also are bought into what it is that we are trying to do.
Well, we are almost out of time. Very quickly, I have one last question. So each of you has met Congressman Lewis in the past. Could you just briefly tell me what is the quality that you liked, admired, or missed the most about him? Ben.
I'll kick it off. Yeah, I'd say his humor and humility. We were talking to his chief of staff and some of his other key staff members, early on in the filming process, to get a sense for different scenes that we should film, where we might gain access to. They said, you guys are really going to have to film him when he lands at the Atlanta airport. And by the way, you're going to need at least 2 hours for that. And we were like, wow, 2 hours? They said, because when he lands at the Atlanta airport, just to make his way out the door, it took 2 hours because everyone in the airport wanted to shake his hand, wanted to talk to him, and he would not leave until he had given everyone a little bit of his time. And we saw that actually where he attended a dinner with all of us at the final day that we were filming in DC. And our dinner was really late. It was like 10 p.m. I think he'd been up since about 3 a.m. And he came out to dinner, and we were all thrilled. I know he was tired. I know he would have preferred to have gone home, but he did it because he knew probably that it was going to be a memory that none of us would forget, having him there. So yeah, those are, some qualities that I think are really special. And his humor, by the way, I think hopefully you saw that in the film. He was a very, very funny person and used humor in a really skillful way to connect with people, actually.
Myrna?
Yeah, he really was. Oh, sorry.
Oh, Wanda, I'm sorry. No, go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna build off what Ben said. I mean, he really was just a man about town. I met him at different, events, early voting events and, whatever kind of events. But then I also enjoyed seeing just all of my friends post on Facebook how they would just run into him at Golden Corral, like the buffet, or just at the grocery store. Like he was just around, he was just everywhere. And to be, to have such access to an icon, the person who he was, but can you imagine seeing him carrying a tray with some chicken and mashed potatoes at the buffet? He was just so real. And to Ben's point, he would stay and take a picture with everybody who was there. He wasn't going to say no. He was just so comfortable in his skin and just who he was. And, he was just a part of, the city, just here. But he was also an icon. It's such a hard thing to kind of balance sometimes, because you're kind of like, oh, Mr. Lewis. It's like, hey, come on over. It just, his presence, just being here, is just missed. I mean, the work that he did obviously was monumental and important, but just him, people last time I was here, I ran into Congressman Lewis, and he's not with us anymore. So his presence, his physical presence, is just really missed in Atlanta.
Thank you.
I would say two things. One of them is more ethereal, and one of them is more concrete. You could tell his fundamental decency just by being in the room with him. Like, you could tell that he was a person that cared, that he was a person that was authentic, that he was a person that loved sacrificially. And it was unignorable when you were in the room with him, when you were next to him, when you saw him hearing, when you saw him walking the halls, when you saw him give a speech. You were gravitated to this decency about him. The other thing is that he was a really good storyteller, and he had these ways of telling stories that really were full of analogies and lessons. And I think a lot of it comes from being the preacher, where he's just really good at finding a way to tell a story that was whatever the audience needed to hear, what their soul was missing at the time, and letting it be something that would work for what it was that somebody needed to quiet their heart in a really troubled time. And I think that understanding the value of narrative and understanding the value of stories and being able to craft stories that work for so many people is just a level of giftedness that I think most mere mortals don't have. I mean, he was just really, really good at that.
Well, Myrna, Ben, Wanda, thank you so much for sharing all that you did with us today. I believe, and now we are turning it over to the audience. Isaac,
Yep.
There you go.
Hello. So we have time for about 1 or 2 questions from the audience. We love engaging our audience as well with questions. And we're starting with Marty. Marty, you're on the air.
One of the things that we've really lost is a local press, and grassroots organizing can really use a local press and the storytelling talents and the outreach. I don't know if the filmmakers or others well acquainted with John Lewis's work know how he used the local press, but if anybody has comments on what we do with this now and any perspective of his that you know about with it, I'd love to hear. Thanks.
Who wants to take this one?
I'll say, I don't know specifically, John, I'm sure that John Lewis had phenomenal relationships with a lot of the local press in Atlanta and other places. I can't speak specifically to that, but I do know that there's some really intriguing research that shows a direct correlation between strong local news outlets and people's likelihood to run for local elected office. And so, yeah, there's all kinds of research that shows how important it is. And there has been, a tremendous depletion of strong local news sources over the last really couple of decades. So glad that you raised the point.
Yeah, I can't necessarily speak to his relationship with press either, but Marty, you raised such a really great point in the storytelling aspect of our work. It's absolutely critical to put faces and names with these issues that we are working on. That's really the best and only way we're going to be able to change hearts and minds is to humanize, the struggles. So that's something that, we're definitely working on at Black Voters Matter. Shout out to Color Farm Media for helping us with a little bit of that. So yeah, the storytelling aspect is crucial. And also too, getting in front of and controlling your own narrative is important. If Black Voters Matter isn't out front, documenting our work, then other people will attempt to tell our stories and they'll skew it and they'll, turn us into some crazy group of radical people when at the end of the day, we're people who are building power and moving in the spirit of love. So, it's storytelling, definitely super, super important.
Thank you. I want to give a big thank you to this amazing panel. I mean, every conversation has been great, and I welcome our audience to check out all the conversations on the Cinematters YouTube channel. We're placing them all there, and this one will be there. And this was another fantastic conversation that couldn't be more special to have on this day. A big thank you to Brittany for moderating, Wanda, Myrna, Ben, thank you so much for being a part of us and sharing with us and bringing this to our community. And I also want to give a shout out to the community in Charleston who joined us for this as well. Upcoming, we don't stop here. First of all, our partners are doing the work year round, as is the work at the JCC. So please take action, join us and be a part of that. We have a film even tomorrow night, so join us for that. The films are available, most of them, until midnight tonight. Tell your friends, check them out, and check out the conversations afterwards on our YouTube channel. Some Kind of Heaven is tomorrow afternoon. We have a Q&A for the movie Some Kind of Heaven, and many more films of importance coming up through the Marlene Meyerson JCC Manhattan in the next few weeks and throughout the year. We really want to do this in person again next year, so please support us and please stay safe, most importantly. Karima and Cheryl, any last words? Karima, handing over to you. Unmute.
There we go. Hey, everyone. Just again, want to thank everyone for coming out during this film festival. Now more than ever, it's our opportunity to lend a voice to the injustices that are happening in our local community and in our world. So we appreciate all of you for taking the time to bring us into your homes during this festival. And again, we hope to see you next year.
Cheryl?
I think it's all been said. Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening. And it has been a pleasure seeing all of you at the festival. Hope to see you next year.
And before that at other events. Thank you all. Stay safe and cause some good trouble. Thank you. Thank you, Joy. See you.